an aspect of our worship that includes an appeal, a confident appeal for mercy and grace to help in time of need. Hebrews 4 and verse 16. If you jump over to Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 22, our worship involves a confidence. Let us draw near with confidence, in a sincere heart, full of faith, having our bodies washed with pure water and our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience. There's that aspect of drawing near. Well, as part of this, if you go on down through the chapter 9, I think this is the next slide. As part of this worship service, Aaron and his sons slaughtered animals and then presented those in the prescribed manner. Aaron applied the blood in the prescribed manner, sprinkling some of it around the altar. That's another key phrase there. We read again in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 13, we are all baptized by one Spirit into one body. Now we need to understand that when it comes to baptism, there are really two sides to baptism. There's two aspects. There's a physical aspect where you literally go down into the water, somebody else goes down into the water with you and literally, physically immerses you in water and brings you back up out of the water. But there's also a spiritual aspect, that all of us being baptized by one Spirit into one body is the spiritual side of that, or part of the spiritual side of that. We don't see the physical manifestation of the Holy Spirit doing the baptizing there into one body, which we don't see in a physical way. So that's the spiritual side. Again, going back to Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 22, where we saw that our bodies are washed with pure water. That's the physical. Our physical bodies are washed, representatively washed, with physical water. But our hearts being sprinkled clean from an evil conscience is a spiritual thing, isn't it? And so that's what's happening here, and that's one of those ties back to Leviticus, where the high priest, in this case Aaron, would sprinkle blood around the altar. And I'm sure that's one of these places that would excite the writer of Hebrews. He understood what that means. And by the way, just to the preacher that used to be over at West Side in Idabel, Brother Aubrey Chalmers, passed away several years ago. But one of the things that he would say at a time like this, he wanted to pause for station identification. Let me just put a plug in for you to look at Leviticus differently when you're doing your daily Bible reading and your Bible study. Because things like what we were just talking about will help us understand passages like the book of Hebrews more like our Jewish brethren, Jewish Christians of the first century would have understood it, because they understood the background. I have been told by a dear sister in Christ, the widow of an elder, many, many years ago, she's long passed since now as well, that we are New Testament Christians, so we don't need to study the Old Testament. Which, by the way, is directly contradicted by the New Testament itself. But if we'll dig deeper into these Old Testament passages, it'll give us a better understanding of the New Testament. And so I would encourage you to do that. Well, we get to chapter 10 of Leviticus. Go ahead and advance. Immediately after the recording of the consecration of the priesthood itself, or at least part of it, at least two of them, fails and becomes the target of the wrath of God. Nadab and Abihu are the two. Nadab and Abihu were the two oldest sons of Aaron. We don't really know how much time passed between the end of chapter 9 and the beginning of chapter 10. Some people want to think it was right away, and it may very well have been. I would not argue that point. But I bring it up because there are those who want to force the events together into one event, because at the end of chapter 9 we see God accepting the sacrifices that were made and manifesting himself in a way that caused the whole congregation to shout and bow down, and it was a great, impressive event in chapter 9 and verse 24. But there are those who want to force 9:24 together with 10:1 and say that the problem was Nadab and Abihu didn't bow down, and so God killed them because they didn't worship him. That's not really what the text says, though, and there's a twofold problem with that. 9:24 says all the people bowed down. Didn't say all but two, it says all of them. And then the other problem with that thought is all the people fell down after they saw the manifestation, which was fire itself. After they saw the fire, they fell down and proclaimed their love and respect for God, and so on and so forth. So the sin was not, they didn't bow down before. Nobody bowed down before the fire. So there are really two separate events here. The issue, and this is on the next slide, is that Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire before the Lord. Chapter 10 and verse 1. And I think if we back up one slide, yeah, there we go. The key to understanding why this fire was strange is found within the text, which the Lord had not commanded. Which the Lord had not commanded. Well, let's just read the verse. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. Well, the question has to come up. What is strange fire? Let me tell you, it is not strange because it was weird. That's the way we use the word strange now. That word is translated strange, and I'm using the New American Standard, by the way. The New King James uses the word profane. The English Standard Version, excuse me, uses the word unauthorized. The literal translation, a definition of that word is strange or unauthorized. I think unauthorized is probably the best one-word translation of this word. The translation or the definition that I use when I teach this class in the Institute is something other than what was expected. God had told them what he wanted, and they gave something else. Now it could be it was other than what was expected because they didn't get their fire from the authorized place. There's really not, there are people who, in fact, I believe the Jewish commentary on this text in the Hebrew Bible offers that explanation. But there's nowhere in the text that really says that, so I'm going to have to leave it as we don't really know, but we don't need to know that. If we did need to know that, don't you think God would have told us that? What he did tell us was it was something that God hadn't said anything about, which the Lord had not commanded. You know, if you look at that phrase, which the Lord commanded, as the Lord commanded, as the Lord commanded Moses, it goes all the way back into Genesis. As the Lord commanded Noah, or Noah did exactly as the Lord commanded. I've counted about 67 times in the whole Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, where that phrase is used. 67 times. So it's a pretty important phrase that we find in this scripture. In Leviticus chapters 8 and 9, 2 chapters out of all of the chapters of the Pentateuch, that phrase is found 17 times. As the Lord commanded, as the Lord commanded, as Moses commanded, which was after God commanded Moses. Down through the 17 times in those 2 chapters until you get to this point, which he had not commanded. Does that give you any idea that doing things the way God said do things is a pretty important thing to do? If we're defining that word strange as unauthorized, does that suggest that authorized worship is what we ought to be offering as opposed to unauthorized worship? I would argue that it does. You know, there are some people, and let's see, I want to go ahead to the next slide as well, and start to make some application here. But there are some people, when they look at what happened with Nadab and Abihu, not when they're looking at that, but they would say something like, maybe those brothers could say what some people say today, well, the Bible doesn't say not to. You ever hear anybody say that? The Bible doesn't say not to. Guess what? The Bible never said, God had never said outside of the Bible, don't offer strange fire, which the Lord had not commanded. Well, apparently, from what happened next, it does matter, doesn't it? The Bible does not specifically, explicitly have to say not to for something to be considered sinful and something against God's will. When you look at what happened next, fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. That's impressive. That's impressive. I'm glad that we don't find the same kind of instant judgment today. Brother John, are you glad that when you mess up in the pulpit, you're glad the fire doesn't come out? What was that, Jimmy?
I said that's my definition of fed up.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know that I could argue with that. I don't think that would be arguable at all. Let's make some application here, because I don't want us to run out of time. We don't see fire coming out of the pulpit. We may hear it, but we don't see it. But how close, does our response to worship and the realization of the presence of God and His acceptance of us move us to respond the way the Israelites did? Do you ever get the idea? And I don't mean in looking at other people around. I want you to look within. Do you ever get the idea when you're in worship, or you're looking back on worship, or even anticipating a future worship? We don't really have, I know we're not expected to stand up and fall down on our face and all shout because we're just so glad to be in the presence of God, or have Him in our presence and that kind of thing. But does your worship to you seem like the level of worship and adoration that we read in Leviticus chapter 9, when God showed to those people that He accepted their worship? They shouted. They couldn't hold it in. I would suggest that today our not holding it in would not be to shout. Okay, if at some point you want to shout over something great that happens, that's fine. Probably not going to be accepted well in the middle of a worship service. That's not our culture. I get that. But if you're not going to hold it in, then express it in good works, in faithful obedience. I'm specifically thinking about when you're faced with temptation. When you're faced with temptation, resist it. Walk away. Even there's nobody around to impress. It's just you and God. Walk away from it. Resist it. Fight that battle. Win that battle for God. And in our worship service, have a real appreciation and understanding. God is with us here today in this worship service, as He is with us everywhere we go. Let's see. Let's go ahead and advance to the next one. How important is it to make sure we don't offer strange fire in our worship? How might we offer strange fire? Now, generally speaking, in the churches of Christ, the only time we ever think about Leviticus 10 verses 1 through 3 and offering strange fire is with respect to instrumental music. That's unauthorized. I would agree with that. But what about other things? What about the worship that I'm offering? And my singing is a cappella. There's no piano in this room. I'm going to sing with my voice, and I'm going to sing all the songs that way. But when the preacher's talking, or when the prayer leader is praying, maybe even while we're singing the song, I'm thinking about where we're going for lunch after worship. or some other thing. I'll tell you one of mine. I'm sitting in worship at Bear Valley, and the song leader isn't pitching the song right, or he's not singing at the right tempo. The worship service itself is not going smoothly. Things along those lines. If I'm not careful, those things distract me so that the worship I'm offering, the fruit of my lips, it's not what God intended. It's not what God intended at all. So I'm encouraging us to examine ourselves to make sure we're not offering strange fire. How might we not treat the Lord as holy? You know, when you get down to verse 3 of Leviticus 10, Moses says, it is what the Lord spoke. This whole thing with the fire coming out, them offering strange fire coming out, killing them, all of that, it's what the Lord said. By those who, and here's our word, come near. By those who worship me, I will be treated as holy. He didn't say, by those who come near to me, I expect to be treated as holy. He didn't say, I want to be treated as holy. He says, I will be treated as holy. If we don't come to God in worship, treating him as holy, and from this context, that means doing God's things God's way, the way he said it, authorized worship, we are not treating him as holy. And that's really the thrust of where we need to go. All right. Next slide, we'll get to our report, and I'll go through this. I think it'll go fairly quickly. Next slide. This is a map of Ukraine. And you've probably seen similar maps on the news and that sort of thing. I want you to notice, and I don't know if this will show up. No, it won't show up on a screen like that. But up in the northeast, you see the town Kramatorsk that I have circled right there? North of that is Kharkiv, which is a town that's been in the news lately. I'm going to come back to that. I just want to identify it for you now. In 1999, the Bear Valley Bible Institute began its international schools program. We called it foreign extensions back then, in the town of Kramatorsk. And that's the town that is circled there. And not very long after that, we moved to, and I think you had the next slide up there, to Gorlovka. And I've got that arrow there because that town, Gorlovka, is not actually on this particular map, but that's kind of where it's located. And you'll notice that it's right near Donetsk, sometimes pronounced Donetsk, which has also been in the news in the last couple of days. There's very heavy fighting right there. It was in Gorlovka in 2014 when the first Russian invasion, and I didn't call it that then, but Russian insurgents took over the two easternmost provinces of Ukraine. And it was on a Sunday morning in May of that year, 2014, when armed insurgents burst into the church building of where our brethren were. It's a building that was owned by the Bear Valley Bible Institute because that's where our school was. And the church met there in that building. They were in the middle of worship when armed insurgents burst in and told everybody, you've got to get out because this place is ours now. And as you can imagine, that would be a very terrifying thing for our brethren to endure. And some of the men managed to convince the armed men to give them some time to gather up. We had all of our student records going back to 1999. So 15 years. And so they gave them an hour. They got those kinds of records out, but there were literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of technology. This school in Ukraine was the first school that we had where we had, there was a brother in Kentucky that had donated the money to put in a state-of-the-art video conferencing system, and we could not live stream, that's the word now, but in real time, somebody could stand in Denver and teach a class in Ukraine. And we had monitors just like this, and on one monitor, you would have, maybe I'm the teacher, and I'm standing like this, And on this monitor, I've got the classroom on the other side. And then down in a little bitty picture in the corner, I can see myself. On their screen, they would see me on the big screen and a little representation of what I was seeing. And then over on this screen, I could have my slides that I'm doing. And a student, I don't know how many thousand miles away Ukraine is from Denver, but a student could raise his hand in Ukraine and the teacher in Denver call on that student to ask the question and then answer it. Great technology. But it was about $50,000 a pop. Well, all of that, all the computers that went along with that then belonged to the Russian insurgents. And so, next slide, the school moved all the way over on the west side to Lviv, and which has also, just in the last day or so, I saw there were missile attacks in Lviv. But then finally settled on Bilat Tserkva in the middle of there, just south, about an hour's drive south of the capital of Kyiv. And that's where the school has been since pretty early after 2014. I didn't keep up with my own stuff here. Let me get caught up. This picture, as you can see, is a picture of a train station in Kharkiv. This is pretty early on in the war, day 12, and you can see how people were trying to get out of that place. It was just a madhouse. And then you go on to Bilat Tserkva itself. We got pictures of missile attacks. This is after, by the way, our students from the school that were meeting in this area, in this neighborhood, as a matter of fact, had evacuated before this missile attack. So I want you to know our students are safe. I've got 2 or 3 pictures of that kind of thing. And then we'll get to this picture. It looks like Dennis, they pronounce it Denise, but Denise Sapelnik is our director of the school over there. Since the war started, Denise has been involved in evacuations. He did evacuate our students out of Bilat Tserkva, but he is still going on right now. I don't know what time of day it is. It's be later in the day on Sunday over there, but he is, as we speak, he is involved in evacuating brethren from the east to the west, trying to get people out of harm's way. Somebody asked me just yesterday, isn't that kind of dangerous? Yes, it's very dangerous, but he's doing that. And it's because of efforts like his and some others that a lot of our brethren are safe. I'm not aware of any, don't take this as gospel because I just don't know, but I'm not aware of any of our brethren having been killed at this point. This is a picture of Brother Denise taking refugees to the border. Sometimes he does it in his car, sometimes he organizes a van, sometimes he organizes a bus. But this is the work that he is doing. Next slide, please. This was a very poignant story. Ukraine is not allowing men between certain ages to leave the country. You're expected to stay and defend your country. And I understand that. But women and children are evacuating. It's not an easy thing, is it? Not an easy thing at all. And you can tell by the look of her face that it's not. And I think I've got one more like that. It's just a very, very terrible thing that's happening over there. The school is now meeting, by the way, down in the southwest corner, Chernivtsi. I don't know how to say that exactly right, but that's where they are now. For all we know, everything I can understand, they're out of harm's way, and they are back having classes again. The Bear Valley congregation supported and supports a missionary family in Ukraine. Andrei Zhuravlev, I couldn't remember his name for a second. Andrei Zhuravlev was a graduate of the school over there, our school over there, and a teacher in that school. He, after 2014, when the Russian insurgents invaded the eastern part, would go back every week. He was going back into that war zone and taking supplies to the brethren, encouraging the brethren, doing very much like the Apostle Paul, encouraging the brethren and helping them in every way that he could. Last fall, maybe late summer, early fall, Brother Andre contracted COVID, and sometime in November passed away. Now, this was a Ukrainian family. This is not a missionary family where we say to the wife, we'll come back home and we'll take care of you. No, this is her home. And so we decided that for at least another year, we were going to continue to support her and her young adult son. Her young adult son, by the way, has told us that he wants to continue his father's work. And we're very happy about that. But then the war started. Can you imagine? You're a recent widow. You don't really know how you're going to live. Well, the brethren here have told her, you're going to live. We're going to make sure of that. And then a war starts. And it's just been a very, very trying time. And she was able to evacuate. This is Veronica is the way they would say it. But she was able to evacuate. Taras is one of the men of the congregation where they were living and working. And he managed to get her out and got her over to the west of the country in Lviv. And let's go to the next slide. This is where she lived in Brovary, which is a suburb of Kyiv, which has been under heavy attack. But she's been out over on the west side in Lviv for several weeks. She's not been exposed to that. This is her in Lviv, teaching children. And I put these pictures in. I've got one more up here. I'll give you some time to read that. No, you're not going to be able to read that. That's just the front page of the newsletter we get on a regular basis from Brother Terry Harmon, who is our stateside coordinator for that school in Ukraine. He lives in South Dakota. But I put that up there because he included in this report a note from Veronica that says this: "Thanks a lot for your prayers. I'm fine. I'm constantly in touch with Christians from Gorlovka, Ilovaisk, and Brovary. All of them are alive and well. I managed to send financial aid to Gorlovka, although it's very difficult. Now I'm looking for a way to send funds to Ilovaisk for Christians. I also bought and sent food and sweets for Natasha's family from Brovary. She has already successfully received that parcel. Next week I'm going to send a parcel to Brovary again to make the children a little happy. I take care of our Christians in Gorlovka, Ilovaisk, and Brovary. I'm glad to do it. I know Andre would do the same. And these brothers and sisters are waiting for my support and trust me in the same way they trusted Andre. I'm very grateful to them for this." And this is what Terry added to that. After all that Veronica has been through, she could have laid down everything and taken a long break, but she hasn't. As a matter of fact, she's doing the exact opposite, trying to help others in their time of need. Veronica is more concerned about brethren who are in difficult places and having hard times than worrying about the problems that have touched her life. That is exactly the kind of Christian living we are told about in God's Word. It's just a very, very encouraging thing to see what our brethren are doing. And Veronica's not the only one. Our brethren are remaining faithful. We have reports of baptisms. Can you imagine? Evangelism is still going on, and they're baptizing people. Let's move on here quickly. As the ladies gathering in Lviv, bottom left, you see Veronica there. This is a picture of our students in Ukraine before the war started. I want you to note the young man on the front right with the beard. Let's go on. His name is Denise as well. I don't remember his last name. All reports were that he is a very good student, is going to be a great gospel preacher. But he was in the military in 2014 when the first invasion occurred, and he's been called up. Last report, he was on the front lines in Kharkiv. That's where he's from, defending his country. And again, as far as we know, he's still alive and well. This was when classes started back. They started back with a class on the minor prophets, and ready to go, minus, of course, the other Denise. Next slide. Real quickly, I want to go through these statistics. We now have in our international program 50 schools, which was our target back in 1999. We're not stopping, though. 50 schools in 28 countries, 109 local teachers, 97 traveled from the United States to teach classes for us in those schools. Next. Total of 861 students at the end of 2021. 4,011 baptisms just last year, and this is by current students, not graduates. We don't have any way to keep up with what our graduates are doing. But 4,011 baptisms last year, 89 new congregations, 34 restored congregations. That just means we found where a congregation used to be, they're not meeting, and our students helped them to get back to meeting again. 596 camps, etc., 183 campaigns, 178 graduates, and 979 restorations. Next. If you put these figures together, we've been keeping these records since 2014. This is what it turns out to be. We've had 1,081 graduates in that time, 23,640 baptisms, again, just by current students, current at that time, 480 new congregations, 1,392 campaigns and gospel meetings, and 148 restored congregations. All I can say is thank you. I know that this congregation has a little bit to do. Don't you guys support David Ballard? Yes. Okay. Well, David is a big part of this International Schools program. He does a great work. I can't say enough in praise of David. And those 148 restored congregations, that really started in the work that David is doing in West Africa, in Cameroon. That's where they would send students out. Their students go out on campaign every weekend. And they would go into a village that didn't have a congregation to establish a congregation and find people say, I'm a member of the Church of Christ. Oh, where do you meet? Well, we don't meet. Well, why not? Well, our preacher died. Or the missionary went back home or something. And so they started restoring these congregations. It's a great work. And even in the midst of a time of great turmoil like is happening in Ukraine. By the way, Ukraine has more Christians in it than probably the rest of Europe combined. For a country to be involved in a war like this, you can almost see the providence of God at work here. I don't want to overstep in saying something like that, but what better place for the church to have a war than where the church is the strongest in the whole continent? And they really are continuing. They're not stopping. I mean, you can see on the news, Ukraine's not giving up. It really does look like Russia bit off more than it could chew. But our brethren are not giving up. Our brethren the reports that we get usually end with God is good. They're not responding the way refugees typically respond. They're responding like our brethren of Acts chapter 8 and verse 4. In Acts 8 and verse 1, and I'll close with this. In Acts 8 and verse 1, a great persecution arose against the church. Right before that was the stoning of Stephen. Great persecution arose against the church. The whole church was scattered from Jerusalem. 35,000 members in that congregation. Who knows? It's huge. They all were driven out of Jerusalem, except for the apostles. And verse 4 says they went everywhere telling their sad story. No, it doesn't. They went everywhere evangelizing, telling the good news. That's what our brethren in Ukraine are doing right now. Thank you so much for your kind attention. I appreciate the opportunity. You bet.